Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this press conference hosted by the American Kratom Association to discuss very important news regarding Kratom and the fight to keep it legal. We appreciate the members of the press who are participating today. My name is Pete Canlin, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association. Today, we will hear from Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, Carrie Biggs, a Wisconsin Kratom consumer, Dr. Jack Henningfield from Penny Associates, and finally, Mack Haddow, Senior Fellow of Public Policy at the American Kratom Association. We are recording this call and we'll be sharing the recording once it's available. After the brief remarks, we will open the meeting up for a question and answer session. We have several questions submitted by the press earlier, but if you are a member of the press, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. So without any further delay, I would like to turn the time over to Congressman Mark Pocan. Mr. Congressman. Mark, you're on mute there. There you go.
You got to go every day with making sure you don't turn off your mute, at least in one Zoom. So I've had a morning full. So thank you very much, Pete. Appreciate it. Very glad to be here with everyone today. You know, this is an interesting time in our country right now, dealing with several important health priorities. We have the COVID-19 pandemic and the opioid crisis that's killing over 81,000 Americans annually. The CDC reported back in December that overdose deaths were accelerating during COVID-19 because of the isolation and the disorder of daily life. Many with COVID-19 have been hit hard with substance use disorders, and knowing the value of Kratom and helping people overcome addiction. About a month ago, Representative Griffiths and I sent the Health and Human Services an inquiry into their view on the scheduling of Kratom. We know that previously they had talked about making Kratom, there had been talks about making Kratom a Schedule I drug. HHS responded to us with a letter that we're sharing today. The letter from the former Assistant Secretary of HHS to the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, withdraws the HHS recommendation to place Kratom as a Schedule I substance and concluded, quote, "There is a significant risk of immediate public health consequences for potentially millions of users if Kratom or its components are included in Schedule I." This letter also called for increased investment in research in Kratom. And on both fronts, that's great news. It's things that we have been saying for 8 years, both in Congress and obviously people who are on this call here today. This is why I've pushed for increased scientific research into Kratom, precisely because of the misunderstanding around Kratom that's created by the initial scheduling recommendation, which could lead to Kratom users switching to highly lethal opioids. Over the last 4 years, I worked with NIH and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality to invest in research on Kratom to better understand the impact on patients using it for pain relief. And it's my hope that with this letter, state legislatures, including my own home state of Wisconsin, will follow the science and end the bans on Kratom. They must also adopt reasonable consumer protections that allow patients in pain to access Kratom while preventing adulterated Kratom products from putting consumers in any danger. And as we confront the opioid crisis during COVID-19 pandemic, this letter stating the HHS withdrawal of its recommendation to place Kratom as a Schedule I substance is welcome news to patients in pain who rely on Kratom. This is a message to states that have wrongly banned Kratom. And I look forward to working with HHS and with the Kratom community to continue to invest in research on this very important substance. So back to you.
Congressman Pocan, thank you very much for those comments. We're pleased to hear next from Carrie, who is a Kratom consumer in Wisconsin, to share some of her thoughts on Kratom and what it is like to be a Kratom consumer in Wisconsin. Carrie, time is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Carrie Biggs. Malcheski's my maiden name. I'm 41 years old. I live in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've been a resident of Wisconsin for pretty much most of my life. Thank you for letting me speak today, and let me give you a little background about myself. I discovered Kratom roughly less than a year before it was banned here in Wisconsin in 2014. I'm a single mom with 3 children, ages 3, 8, and 15. And I also care for my disabled mother. I also have several diagnoses that I've received throughout the course of my life, including fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, IBS, interstitial cystitis, diverticulosis, chronic fatigue, migraines, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. I was on a slew of pharmaceutical medications that some of them helped a little, some of them did not. Most of them gave me side effects that weren't desirable to somebody who's responsible for 3 children, a mother, an entire household, working, all that good stuff. So in my despair of not wanting to deal with all of the things that come with a lot of the pharmaceuticals, I decided to try and find something else that might help me that wouldn't have all that. And in my searches, I found Kratom. I researched Kratom for 5 months before I decided to try it myself. I got a lot of personal perspective and, you know, did a lot of research. I research a lot of things. Every medication my mother's been put on my entire life, I've researched every time she got put on something new because she's sickly as well. So I tried it and it was almost an instant change in my life. I had my life back. My children had their mother back. I was able to return to work full time. I could keep up with the housework in this house. And I was just a more present person emotionally as well. But, you know, unfortunately that ended and I was back to square one. And that's one of the roughest things I still deal with today because I went back to square one and I'm still dealing at square one because I haven't found anything that helps me as much as Kratom did. And now I have nothing. I mean, I use CBD oil and things of that nature, but I can't use the one thing that really, really helps me. Let's see here. Okay. Like so many others, I'm left searching for something that will help, and I've yet to find anything. Unfortunately, my story is not unique. There's so many people around here that, or around the world, that have found it helps them. There's a lot of people around the world that have had it taken away from them as well. I believe that it is a miracle plant. It's helped me in so many ways. And I just hope that one day we can get people to open their eyes and see that people should be allowed the choice to do what helps them in life, what makes them have a better quality of life. And like I said, I call Kratom a miracle plant, and I hope and pray every day that one day soon I will have the option to use what works for me again. And that's why over the years, I've continued to advocate for Kratom in my state and all over the place, because I believe in it. And there's so many of us who believe in it as much as I do, even more than I do. So that's really all I have. And
Carrie,
I'm just a regular person here.
Carrie, thank you very much. I know the ban on Kratom in Wisconsin has been tough for a lot of individuals, and I very much appreciate you coming and sharing your story with everyone on the call. We are also very fortunate to have Dr. Jack Henningfield, who has been a leading voice in the discussion on Kratom, join us today. And so, Dr. Jack, I'd like to turn the time over to you.
You bet. I'm Jack Henningfield, Vice President of Research and Health Policy at Pinney Associates and Adjunct Professor of Behavioral Biology at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And boy, Carrie, you're why we're all here. There are millions of people like you, and we know that from published surveys, including a survey that I did and colleagues at Johns Hopkins did. This is why we're here. Well, Pinney Associates provides consulting to develop safer medicines, I want to disclose, for treating pain and addiction and many other disorders. We also advise the dietary supplement industry and the American Kratom Association. It's not medicines versus dietary supplements, it's what works for people. You've seen the 2018 letter from Assistant Secretary Giroir to the DEA. I shared it with other Kratom experts, and their reaction was the same as mine, except for one important omission. The letter was exactly what we have been pleading for on behalf of researchers, public health, and most importantly, millions of Kratom users. In our open letters to FDA and DEA, and in our publications and public hearings. For many people, Kratom is a natural herbal product used routinely for various reasons, such as occasional pain in place of coffee for alertness, to relax, for general well-being. But for other people, and Carrie is an example, of people that have serious uses, and for some of those, it's a lifeline away from opioids, whether they had been using opioids for chronic pain, addiction, or both. They have been terrified by the prospect of losing Kratom and either turning back to prescription or illicit opioids, or to the illicit Kratom market that would quickly fill the void. The letter rightly states that scheduling Kratom, and by that I mean the key active ingredient mitragynine, as well as 7-hydroxymitragynine, carries, and I quote, a significant risk of immediate adverse public health consequences for potentially millions of users of Kratom, such as those suffering with intractable pain and those who might switch to highly lethal opioids, including prescription opioids, heroin, and/or fentanyl, risking thousands of deaths from overdoses and infectious diseases associated with IV drug use. Well, this is an important acknowledgement because opioids accounted for more than 50,000 of the 70,000 drug overdose deaths in 2019, and the toll is rising with COVID-19. None of those deaths were listed as a Kratom-caused death. Consistent with this fact, the letter also states, and I quote, there is still debate among reputable scientists over whether Kratom by itself is associated with fatal overdoses. Well, the letter also highlights the need for more research. Unfortunately, some of the very research called for in the letter has been delayed. Delayed because many of our nation's best researchers declined to initiate Kratom research with a cloud of a potential scheduling ban looming overhead. Fortunately, some research has continued, and with funding from NIH, the science is rapidly expanding. So finally, the crucial omission in the Assistant Secretary's letter is the need for evidence-based public health-focused regulation. Our nation needs FDA in the game, setting standards for Kratom product purity and everything else it routinely does for dietary supplements, and even for Kratom's botanical cousin, coffee beans and ground coffee. Fortunately, 4 states have already begun to blaze this trail with their own consumer protection regulatory frameworks. And many companies are working with the American Kratom Association on voluntary good manufacturing practices. So FDA doesn't need to start from scratch. This is an exciting day for Kratom consumers, researchers, public health, and those of us working to turn the course of the deadly opioid epidemic. I have provided a few relevant recent papers and earlier testimony I have given to FDA as to how Kratom fits as an asset in addressing the opioid epidemic. Thank you, Carrie, and everybody else that is working in this area. You are what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henningfield. We really appreciate your comments, and your work in this field is very important. We will next hear from Mack Haddow, who is the Senior Fellow on Public Policy at the American Kratom Association. Mack?
Thank you, Pete, and thanks to everyone who's joined this call today. In 2016, in an unprecedented action, the DEA withdrew its notice to publish notice to schedule Kratom under the emergency section of the Controlled Substances Act. I was asked at the time, how did you accomplish that? And now today we're talking about a rescission of a recommendation for scheduling that was made by the FDA through HHS on October 17th of 2017. And based on all the research that I've been able to find, this is the first time that HHS has rescinded such a recommendation. And I was asked this morning, how did that happen? And I can only tell you there are 2 people responsible for that. One is Congressman Mark Pocan. His diligent efforts on behalf of the Kratom consumers in America and for the good public policy that underpins that was the effort that led to the DEA's rescinding of their original recommendation scheduling notice and for the action that we're learning about today, although it took place a while back. And secondly, it is Kratom consumers like Carrie. I have traveled the country and been in dozens and dozens of hearings where I've heard from literally thousands of Kratom consumers who say with passion that Kratom has improved the quality of their life, or in some cases, saved their lives. This is an important day today because now the Assistant Secretary of Health has allowed us to focus on what needs to come next. And that is for good science, which Congressman Pocan has led the fight for in the FY 20 and 21 appropriations bills, to allow the federal government to focus their research efforts to make certain that we can identify exactly how Kratom can be effectively used in order to serve Kratom consumers. And particularly in this epidemic that we're in with opioid overdose deaths that Congressman Pocan referenced, given the complexity of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in, where people feel isolated, where they are turning to opioids and leading to overdose deaths, which result in the spike that the CDC has referenced during opioid, Kratom is a lifeline, literally, if it were available. And what has happened over the last 2.5 years, where the FDA has allowed this cloud to hang over Kratom with the threat, which was removed but not disclosed, where people could freely use it, where they could talk to their doctors and in confidence and say, I'm using Kratom, and get advice, where they could find a lifeline away from deadly opioids. Johns Hopkins University did a peer-reviewed published article in early 2020 that draws completely the emphasis that should be followed here. And that is that in their research of those Kratom consumers that used Kratom in order to deal with chronic or acute pain, and that were using it to relieve the withdrawal symptoms from opioids, they found that 87% experienced significant reduction in those terrible withdrawal symptoms that they were experiencing. And critically, 35% were opioid free within a year. That's the testimony that Kratom should be studied, that it should be allowed for use by responsible, informed consumers, and it is a harm reduction mechanism that is available today. The HHS letter outlines the challenge for the study of Kratom. We propose to work with the FDA today to establish a regulatory framework that will allow for the elimination of adulterated Kratom products that do cause harm, that will clean up the contamination of some Kratom raw materials and finished products that exist through good manufacturing practices. We want to partner with the FDA in order to protect the American consumer, and so that a consumer can rely upon a safe Kratom product being purchased. And that's the harm reduction strategy that can be in place. So we thank Congressman Pocan and his colleagues for their efforts. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude because they are saving lives in America today in the midst of this terrible circumstance that we're in there, where we see so many that are lost. And in this case, unnecessarily in some cases, as the letter from HHS points out. So thank you, Congressman Pocan. Thanks to the Kratom community that has spoken so loudly and passionately to the states. And we look forward to expanding the number of states that will pass the KCPA going forward here in the next couple of months. So Pete, thank you. Turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mack, and thank you for all your work. We're going to open it up for a brief question and answer session now. If you are one of the panelists and would like to ask a question, please, you can turn on your microphone or you can turn on your video and we can hear from you. We've had several questions submitted by the press before the meeting, and I'd like to first go through those questions to get answers. So anyone on the panel, if you want to jump in, you can answer these questions. One individual wrote, when did the AK find out about this letter, and has it been confirmed to be authentic?
So Congressman Pocan actually requested, as he mentioned, along with his colleague from Virginia, as part of their oversight responsibilities and his interest in Kratom and the progress that was being made. And that's how the letter was disclosed. So I'll let Congressman Pocan explain the process from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mack. And yeah, that's correct. So it is absolutely a valid letter because we've got it through doing that request. And we're trying to make sure now people are very aware of this, because as Mack mentioned, we did have some funding specifically to study Kratom, and it's exactly what they're asking for in the letter. And, we have states, including my own state of Wisconsin, as Carrie said, that have banned Kratom. There's not as many states. Most states have been very reasonable, but we have to make sure those are overturned as well. The good news is with the new administration, the head of HHS, if approved, will be Javier Becerra, a former colleague and friend of mine from Congress. And I serve on the Oversight Committee on Appropriations for HHS. And I also serve on the Agricultural Subcommittee, which has oversight over the FDA, and we don't have a nominee. So the good news is I'll have lots of chances to have additional conversations as well.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question we have is, how will this letter impact the current bans in states and localities across the country?
So I'll take the first crack at this. The good news is that we have lobbying efforts right now, today in 31 states, asking those states to join the 4 that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. States are complicated, and the COVID restrictions on access to the legislative sessions have complicated our advocacy efforts, but we are working hard with lobbyists on the ground in these key states to overturn the bans that have been in effect. And in the state of Wisconsin last year, the Senate Health Committee unanimously opened a bill file that would replace the ban there with the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We saw in the state of Missouri that it passed out unanimously from committee this morning, the KCPA. Last year, it passed the House 139-3, I think. In Oklahoma, it was unanimous in the Oklahoma House. In New Hampshire, the ban bill was replaced with the KCPA and passed unanimously in the New Hampshire Senate. In Vermont, another ban state, I am told that the sponsor of the KCPA is dealt with his colleagues and is very optimistic they're going to overturn the ban there. The same is true in Rhode Island, where the bill has been filed in both the House and the Senate, and the director of the Department of Health has formally opened a review process to look at replacing the Kratom ban with the KCPA or supporting it. And so I think we're making great progress. It's going to require a lot of effort by our advocates on the ground, our grassroots advocacy, Carrie and her colleagues that use Kratom, that are consumers that benefit from it. So we're very optimistic that we'll be able to provide support for the FDA to responsibly regulate this product. The important thing is, in surveys that we have done in the states that passed the KCPA, there has been a dramatic reduction in the number of adulterated Kratom products that are available for sale. That's the consumer protection that we need to have.
And let me just add to that. The machine of science has been moving forward. We have a lot more science than we did when FDA made its first proposal and DEA did back 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago. And the problem is that I have run into, whether I've been trying to deal with state level administrators, health people, other countries, and health providers like the Mayo Clinic. They all would say the same thing, yes, but. Well, what was yeah, but? It was the FDA's position is that it's a deadly addictive narcotic like opioid. And that hasn't changed. Now with this letter, it doesn't all of a sudden make everything change. It does say that follow the science. It seems like with this letter, we're all on the same scientific page. And for whatever reasons, things happened in the past, let's go forward.
Thank you. And Dr. Henningfield, this leads into the next question. I know you're a very gracious individual and you might not take the opportunity with this question, but you and your colleagues have done a lot of research on Kratom, have published a lot of information on Kratom. Sometimes you've taken a little heat on your position. This reporter wants to know, do you feel a sense of vindication with the publishing of this letter?
I'm not going to do a Tony Fauci and recite the periodic table of contents, but you know, people in science work to advance science and public health, and what Carrie's comments are what it's all about. And yes, there's vindication, but that's not what's important. What's really important is that, wow, we can go forward rationally, following the science, do what we can to serve public health, to help consumers with cleaner, pure products. Carrie should be able to go into the store and buy a product with Kratom with the same confidence that she can buy dog food and know that what is in it is labeled and regulated and so forth. That's what's important.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I would just add that I think that it may not vindicate, but it validates the position that Congressman Pocan took with his colleagues in 2016 with that extraordinary bipartisan letter where we had 26 Republicans and 25 Democrats in the House that sent the letter to the DEA encouraging them to rescind their notice. And then you saw in the Senate 13 members of the Senate, and you had on one end of the political spectrum Orrin Hatch, who then the senator from Utah, who was arguably one of the most conservative members of the Senate. And then you had Bernie Sanders on the other, who we all know is one of the most liberal members. And they both agreed that the DEA was taking the wrong position. So it tells you that this is a matter of philosophy, and validating the point that each of those members made at that time was that we ought to study this, that we ought to open up the opportunity for safe Kratom products to be used responsibly to fight against this epidemic of opioid deaths that continues to plague our nation. And I think that validation is the most important issue that we're dealing with today.
Absolutely. One of the final questions I have is, now that you have this letter, where will the AKA go from here?
Well, after we've done the victory lap, which I'm joking, now we redouble our efforts. We've got to take care of those bans in the states. We've got to work with Congressman Pocan to gain support for a federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which will outline the responsibility that FDA could take and should for the regulation of Kratom. We need to make sure that GMP practices are followed. They already have the framework. They do it for coffee beans. Kratom is a plant that is akin to the coffee family. And so it would not be difficult for the FDA to pivot to that. They're going to need a little nudge. And I think the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act will provide that. We are going to this year, this battle is not over. The FDA is going to continue to prosecute their case. We don't expect them to pivot hard to this. We wish they would. If they were, they would have done this 2.5 years ago when this notice was first made known to them. They failed to do that. So I think we have to just expect we're going to have to nudge them into the right position. These, by the way, are good people. They're well-intentioned. They just are wrong. When I worked at HHS and I oversaw had an opportunity to oversee some of the activities of the FDA, I saw it. There were people at the FDA that believed that vitamins and dietary supplements were bad. They made the same arguments, and it took Congress stepping in to pass the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. That was done unanimously, by the way. And so, Congressman, that gives you a chance that's sort of a bar to hit, whether that's possible today or not. But they unanimously passed the DSHEA Act, which put in place a structure for dietary supplements to be approved by the FDA, or to at least have notice and allow consumers access. That's what we're going to need to do with Kratom, I think, and that's our next challenge at the federal level. But we're going to fight hard on the state level to get these KCPAs passed in as many states as we can.
Can I add a point to that? The part of what a lot of us in science have liked about working with AKA is that their motto was follow the science, and they don't tell us what to say. The science now is more important than ever. Kratom, nothing is perfectly safe. Nothing is effective for everybody. You need labeling, you need regulations that make sure that Kratom is properly stored, cured, labeled, that it's not spiked or adulterated. So the science is more important than ever before. Fortunately, we've got enough science to help FDA get started right now. We don't need more science to get started on regulation. We got enough to get started, but we will need science to keep guiding us along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. If there's any other questions that press have on the call, please let me know. With that, I want to let everyone know that we have recorded this and we'll be sending it out to folks. The statements and other materials, the letter will be available for people to see, and we'll be sending that out. I want to give everyone one final time to make any remarks that they'd like to make. Carrie, I want to thank you again for being on the call today. Your story is powerful, and we want to thank you for continuing to be a Kratom advocate. So thank you very much.
Anytime.
Dr. Henningfield, are there any final comments that you'd like to make before we end this call?
I really want to again thank Congressman Pocan for his leadership, because the science is irrelevant if we don't get an outlet and if Congress doesn't act. you know, we're just in our laboratories doing our thing and loving it, but not making a difference. Congressman, you've given us an opportunity to make a difference. And I want to go back to something Mack said. I've briefed Rand Paul's staff, Elizabeth Warren's staff, Orrin Hatch's staff, all over the spectrum. And they were all clearly following the science and driven to support our efforts because of people like Carrie. It makes me feel good about the future. There's hope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Henningfield. And thank you, Congressman Pocan, for being such a fantastic advocate for Americans all over this country who want to have the right to make their own decisions about their health and well-being. Are there any final comments, Congressman, that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just want to express my appreciation for American Kratom Association. You know, we've worked with you hand in hand for, I think, about 8 years on this, or at least 6 years. And, you know, from the strategy on working on bipartisan letters to the strategy on you know, working to get it off being asked for Schedule I, from getting funding for research because we knew how vital that was. It's really been your efforts working with us that have been tremendously helpful. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And finally, Mack, are there any final comments that you would like to make before we end this call?
Sure, thank you. And I would add one caution to, and this is a great moment for us. I mean, obviously to be able to have this information, but the challenge is not just with the government. The challenge is with responsible behavior by consumers. I know that there are viewers that are on the call right now from Indonesia. They have a deep concern about the ability to transport and to ship Kratom products that are free from contaminants into the United States. But on both sides of this equation, in Indonesia and here in the United States, there are some people that are bad actors. I purchased some Kratom products from an Indonesian farmer, and I went ahead and packaged it, and I'm going to sell it. This is what I call great Kratom. I have no idea if this is safe Kratom. I don't know what's in it. I don't know whether it's contaminated with heavy metals, salmonella, or E. coli, but I got it, and I can put it in a Ziploc bag and I can send it out. This will be the death of the Kratom industry if we allow this kind of unregulated product to continue to be sold on the internet, through Facebook. We've got to commit ourselves to good manufacturing practices, good processes, training of employees, making sure that finished products are properly packaged, that they're tested for all of these contaminants, that they're not adulterated, and that they're labeled properly, and we restrict them from sale to minors. That's our challenge. And I know that will be painful for some consumers who are used to buying it on the cheap. We've got to stop that. We've got to be adults about this and come to the table as responsible consumers and tell the FDA that we'll partner with them in making sure that we eradicate the adulterated and contaminated products from the marketplace. That's our goal and our challenge as we go forward. And I thank everyone that acts responsibly within this Kratom community for their support of that effort.
Thank you, Mack, and thank you. I'd like to thank the press who were able to join us today. We will make information available. You can always contact me at my email address, pete.candlin@americankratom.org, for more information. I'd like to thank the hundreds of Kratom consumers who have joined this call. I think when you get several hundred people on a call like this in the middle of the day on a Thursday, it really speaks to how important this plant is to a lot of folks. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. Have a great day today. Thank you.
Thank you.